Hi everyone, welcome to my presentation. This is Zhihua Fan. The title of my presentation is The Diversity of Microorganisms in Traditional Chinese Fermented Vinegars. So the vinegar in China, according to the historical documents, vinegar has been brewing in China for more than 3,000 years. At present, there are more than 1,000 kinds of vinegar commonly used in the Chinese market for sale. For example, like some famous vinegar in China, Shanxi aged vinegar, Zhenjiang aromatic vinegar. So the most of the Chinese traditional vinegar is made from the grain and the cereal. The green vinegar is a broad vinegar made from the virus grain, and the green vinegar is made from the sorghum as a raw materials. Here is an example of processing method of this Chinese vinegar fermentation. The basic process of making this vinegar is mixing and steaming the grain materials for several hours and adding water and daji. Daji is used as a starter, which includes different kinds of microorganisms. So alcohol fermentation, acetic acid fermentation, and oxidive mixing. So acetic acid bacteria cannot be replaced. Microbial fermentation process. It could convert the ethanol to acetic acid under the aerobatic conditions due to the raw materials in the process of making vinegar is cereal grain. The nutrition in these materials is very rich, so in the process of the Chinese vinegar, generally do not need to add other nutrients to maintain the survival of the acetic acid bacteria. However, the acetic acid bacteria cannot survive in the absence of the oxygen. Let's look at the microorganisms in three different fermentation processes. First, we are going to look at the relationship between the microorganisms and the starch scarification. This mainly the process of the microbial and the amylase hydrolyzing starch and converting it into the sugar. This process is mainly produced in vinegar fermentation from the grains. Many Chinese fermentation vinegar contains this process because of the higher starch content in grains. But there are no such steps for fermentation vinegar from high sugar raw materials such as fruit vinegar. In traditional Chinese fermentation vinegar, so most of the grain contains starch are crushed. After cooking, the plant cell and the tissues are broken, so the starch expands due to the water absorption and the decomponents into a starch plate in a solution state. When it finishes, this can be removed. The solution of the starch is converted into fermentable sugar. The process of the starch scarification can be controlled according to the different temperatures. In this stage, although there are not many types of the microorganisms involved, and only a few moles participate in. But this stage is also very important. They determine the flavor and quality of the vinegar. Because of the raw material is very important. So in the starch scarification stage, manufacturers needs to add amylase and starch hydrolyze to help the conversion of the starch. The commonly used material in Chinese vinegar is dachi. We talk about it later. The aim of this stage is to provide significant sugar for the subsequent alcohol fermentation. So generally speaking, the content of the degree of the starch crushing in grains will affect the time and degree of the starch scarification. The higher the content and the more finely broken grains are. So the shorter time for the starch scarification will be, the more sugars will be formed. Let's move on to the alcohol fermentation. Alcohol fermentation is an important part of determining the flavor of the vinegar. In the alcohol fermentation stage, different types of vinegar contains different strengths. It is worth monitoring that yeast plays a huge role in this stage. So the conversion of the sugars into the ethanol will greatly increase the alcohol content of the fermented materials due to the metabiotics of the yeast and its own activity. So therefore, many other microorganisms cannot grow in high concentrations of alcohol, thus ensuring of the taste of the vinegar. In some grain fermentation materials with low sugar content, it is necessary to add aspergillus first. So aspergillus will speed up the conversion of the sugar and ethanol because the microbiotics of the aspergillus increase the lack of the sugar after the previous starchification reactions and increase the sugar concentrations in fruit vinegar. Because of the sugar concentration is higher than others, the help of the mold is not needed. So the main microorganisms at this stage is yeast and lactobacillus and enzymes. Finally, the acid bacteria fermentation is highly critical part in this fermentation period. So most of the major flavor components in vinegar are produced at this stage. In acetic acid fermentation period, most bacteria are acetic acid bacteria, which can react with higher concentration of alcohol and high acidity. So the primary microorganisms involved in the acetic acid fermentation period are lactobacillus, acetic acid bacteria, and glucobacillus. So a large number of studies have shown that the most important microorganisms in this stage is acetic acid bacteria. So the diversity of the microorganisms relate to many parts. It relates to the raw materials and different environment. Let's talk about it. The microbial variety involved in early fermentation period of the fruit vinegar is less than the cereal fermentation. In fermentation process, using different material will lead to different result. Different raw materials will directly affect the growth and the reproduction of the microorganisms. For example, many traditional Chinese fermented vinegars are used grains as a fermentation materials, and grain vinegar contains more starch. Therefore, the mold and yeast often involved in fermentation. The main function of the mold is to release and amylase the carried and scaturify the starch. The summary of my presentation. So the Chinese vinegar culture is intensive and profound. The fermentation process of the vinegar is is an ancient process that contains rich microbial diversity. So the diversity of the microorganisms and the fermentation method, fermentation raw materials, and applications in fermentation process. We discussed it early. So most traditional vinegar fermentation in China adopts a still-state fermentation technology. So yeast and acetic acid bacteria and lactobacillus plays a huge role in fermentation process of vinegar because of the fermentation process of the certain varieties of vinegar is too long in order to commerize a large-scale production. So a lot of research and on the improvement of the fermentation process is required in the future. So this is end of my presentation. Thank you for watching.